Happy New Year from the Orchid Hut, and what better way to kick things off for 2025 than with 3 new orchids for my collection. I'll be introducing each one of these to you along with a little bit about their care, all coming up at the Orchid Hut. Welcome back to the Orchid Hut. My name is Dana, and thank you for joining me today to introduce these 3 new orchids in my collection. Now, I have to rewind just a little bit. I did purchase all 3 of these at the beginning of December, and they've kind of just been hanging out for a few weeks waiting for me to get around to making this video, and so I'm doing that today. If you've been following my channel, you know that I lost quite a few orchids over the growing season in 2024, and so I am looking for new and unique orchids to kind of fill in the gaps, and I'll be searching as well to replace some of the ones I lost, but all 3 of the ones that I'll be talking about today that are new to my collection, I've never grown these before, so I will have to be learning about them along the way and applying the best that I can in cultivation to hopefully have these be successful. Now, the very first one that I'm going to introduce to you, I think, is extremely unique. I went to some of my favorite orchid nurseries in the Heights area of Houston before the Christmas holidays. And that wasn't the best time to try to go shopping for orchids because, of course, all of the nurseries had spent a lot of time decorating for the holidays, and so orchids were kind of pushed out of the way for that particular seasonal activity at the nursery. And so I was very, very fortunate to run across this one orchid, which from a distance didn't even look like an orchid. I had to get up close to it, see the name, ask a little bit about it, and yes, it's an orchid, even though it might look a bit more like a cactus. Well, the common name is desert orchid. Now, if you happen to Google that name, the very first thing that it's going to show you is a gorgeous thoroughbred British racehorse by the name of desert orchid. You have to search a little bit more to actually find reference to desert orchid, the plant. I've even had to kind of take a little bit of notes for this one today because it is so different and unique. It's something that I'm going to have to kind of practice and, learn how to grow this one. So the real orchid name is Eulophia Petersii. Now that is quite difficult to pronounce, so I'm going to put that on the screen for you to see how it is spelled. And this particular orchid is native to Arabian deserts and the deserts in South Africa. It is a terrestrial orchid with a rather large tuberose root system. So when growing this one in cultivation, it's going to prefer more of a coarse, well-draining, succulent type mix, or possibly a rocky, maybe more of a bonsai type mix. In the wild, this one grows in the rocks with very little soil, very little access to nutrients, and kind of like rock outcroppings is where you would find this one in the wild. Now, in the summer, it's a heavy drinker, but it does like to drain and dry out quickly. So in cultivation, I will have to wait until this one becomes dry before watering it again and make sure that it has adequate drainage in the pot that it lives in. Now, in the winter, it actually prefers to be dry, and that's one of the things that will promote blooming in the spring. And I'll put a picture of the bloom here. It's a very interesting brown, white, pink, greenish undertones type bloom. And a larger plant can have 12, up to 12 of these inflorescences on them, sort of like on long spikes. Now, it's very temperature tolerant, all the way from freezing to about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So in my environment, you know, it will do perfectly okay outside, but we'll be coming in for the winter. For sunlight, you know, you might think that this one would prefer bright sunlight, but that's not the case. Even when it grows in the wild on the rocky outcroppings, it does get partial shade. So in cultivation, I will need to be making sure that this one is, you know, partial shade, maybe dappled sunlight. And again, cool, dry winter rest for blooming. And it's got these very thick pseudobulbs. Now this particular one had green leaves when I purchased it, but I do believe this is kind of a natural falling away of leaves from the older pseudobulbs. This particular one has 3. In the summer you can tell that it needs watering, they say, because these will shrivel a bit. And mine is not the least bit dehydrated at the moment. Now, one of the things to be very cautious of if you find one of these and want to add it to your collection, the leaves are extremely thick and they do not flex much at all. The other thing about them, and I don't know if the camera can pick up on this, but the edges of the leaves are serrated like a bread knife. You would not necessarily want this one around children, pets, or in walkways where people are, you know, passing by, because those serrated edges are extremely sharp, and I can sort of envision that if you brushed up against this one, that it could actually cut you. So that's something to be very cautious about if you add this one to your collection. So really excited to be trying to grow this one. I do think I will be repotting it, especially later in the spring, if it shows me that it's not even going to bloom for me. I'm not entirely certain that I have given this one the best care for the winter, because I have given it a tiny bit of water, even though now I've read about the advice to keep it extremely dry. Okay, so more updates coming for this one, probably later on in the year as I repot it. All right, moving on to orchid number 2. Okay, back with new orchid number 2. Now I have to keep this one in a heavier pot because it has become so top heavy that it will tilt over, especially now that it is going into dormancy and it's not getting water. So let's have a look at the tag here for this monstrous orchid. Cycnodes, Taiwan Gold, Orange. And I'll put that name up on the screen if the camera doesn't focus on it. Now this orchid happens to be a cross. Now it is part of the Catasetinae tribe of orchids, but this one is a cross between a Cycnodes, Chlorokylon, and a Mormodes badia. I hope I pronounced those correctly. So this orchid is a primary hybrid, being the cross of those 2 species orchids. Now it just so happens that I have one of the parents of this orchid already in my collection. I have a Chlorokylon in my collection right now that has a bud on it. So I'm hoping to be able to show you a parent of this orchid in bloom shortly here. But look at this massive pseudobulb. Now it's kind of funny because the young man at the orchid nursery who sold this one to me said this orchid just kept blooming and blooming and blooming, and sure enough it bloomed 1, 2, 3, 4 times on this one particular growth from last season. And gosh, you know, one can only hope that it will perform this way in my care. But like most Catasetinae type orchids, this one does go into dormancy, does need the dry winter's rest, but slightly differently than what you might be used to for these orchids is that this one does produce blooms in the late summer, early fall. So it blooms while it still has foliage. And I'll put a picture up on the screen when I'm editing this video to show you not only the blooms, but the fact that there are green leaves in the background. So, you know, gorgeous, gorgeous way for this plant to still be able to bloom while it has green leaves. So watering has ceased for this one. It's planted entirely in sphagnum. And unlike other Catasetinae orchids, I may not be cutting back the root system when I repot this one because I suspect the root system for this one will still be alive and the new growth will add to that root system. All right, so I'm looking forward to adding this one to my collection. Other than a few slight differences in its growth habit, I'll probably be caring for it very similarly as I do my other Catasetinae type orchids. All right, moving on to orchid number 3. Okay, so back with the third new orchid in my collection. This one is clearly a Dendrobium. It does not have a tag, however. So my closest guess is that it is probably some sort of hybridized Dendrobium nobile type orchid. It has a gorgeous, gorgeous pink and white bloom with a greenish center. And just this morning as I was passing by, I did notice a very, very light, sweet scent coming from the blooms. Now, mind you, you do have to get your nose up close and personal with the bloom before it smells, but it does have a very, very faint, sweet scent. Now, when I purchased this orchid, and by the way, if you happen to be near the area where I live, we have a grocery store by the name of Trader Joe's. So this was a Trader Joe's orchid. It was just beginning to bloom at the bottom when I purchased it, and the buds at the top of the plant were still unopened. And now that I've had it a few weeks, some of the buds at the bottom of the cane are beginning to wilt. But overall, it has been in bloom for quite a while. You know, I had one of these type orchids in my collection years ago. I was growing it in the bay window closer to the glass, along with my Phalaenopsis orchids. And I can't say that I really knew how to care for it in the best way possible, and I ultimately lost that orchid. As I'm reading now about the care for this type orchid, it is a bit more picky with air circulation. It's probably a little bit more picky with how to treat it towards the end of the summer and late fall so that it does bloom. It does need a cooler pre-winter rest in order to bloom. And so of course, you know, this one was probably growing in a greenhouse somewhere where they could control the environment in order to get it to bloom before shipping out to be sold in a big box store. So, you know, this one is going to take a year, maybe 2, to kind of adapt to my growing conditions before I'll get it to bloom again. And of course, it probably will need to put on some new canes in that time. And I was also reading that just because you have great new cane growth doesn't really have anything at all to do with the ability to get this one to bloom again. Apparently, it is very prone to creating kikis instead of blooms. All right, so the third gorgeous new orchid in my collection. I'll be giving updates on this one as we go along into 2025. Thanks again so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget the notifications bell to let you know when I've posted something new, and the subscribe button will be coming up in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Thank you all so much for watching, and talk to you next time.